Hello and welcome back to Skepticus. I am your host, Adam of Nola. Today we're going to embark on a little thought experiment, one that I believe cuts to the very heart of how we understand morality, sin, and the nature of divine judgment. It's a concept that, once you start pulling at its threads, can unravel some very deeply held beliefs about right and wrong, especially within the framework of traditional Christian theology. We're going to imagine a scenario of ultimate isolation. Picture this. A man, let's call him Alex, crash lands on a distant, uncharted alien planet. His ship is utterly destroyed. No hope of repair, no communication equipment left intact. He is, to put it bluntly, hopelessly marooned. Now, this planet, luckily, is a paradise of sorts for a human. Breathable atmosphere, fresh water, abundant edible plants and animals. Alex could, theoretically, live out a long, healthy life here. But here's the kicker. He is the only intelligent life form on the entire planet. No other humans, no sentient aliens. And because the planet is uncharted, there's no reason to believe that anyone else will ever stumble upon him. He is truly, utterly alone for the rest of his life. Now, with this very solitary existence in mind, I want to ask you a profound question. Is it even possible for this man, Alex, to do anything that is immoral? Take a moment to really consider that. When you strip away all societal constructs, all human interactions, all relationships, what does immoral even mean? Now, most Christians, when asked this question, would likely answer with a resounding yes, absolutely. And they may point to a variety of actions. Perhaps they'd say Alex could curse God. Or maybe if he'd salvaged some forbidden snacks from his ship, he could eat alien shellfish or wear clothes woven from two different alien fibers. Some might even suggest that if he had rescued some adult material from his wreckage, he could lust after it or even masturbate. Others might warn against attempts to conjure spirits, perhaps from the wreckage in his profound loneliness. Now, depending on your particular religious beliefs, some or all of these might indeed be considered sins. But doesn't that just feel ridiculous? When one person is utterly isolated from any other human being, from any society, any culture, any community, why should anything that he does be classified as a sin in the traditional sense? To be clear, it's perfectly understandable that Alex could do things that are ill-advised or counterproductive. He could, for instance, contaminate his only source of drinking water, leading to illness. Or he could neglect building proper shelter, leaving him vulnerable to the elements. Those are matters of prudence, of self-preservation, but are they immoral? My contention, and what we're going to explore today, is that it feels incredibly petty and strangely disconnected from the very purpose of morality to believe that a supposedly benevolent, omnipotent, magic sky daddy would be watching this poor, lonely soul and actively judging him for the thoughts and actions that he commits while being completely removed from any other aspect of humanity. What's the harm? To whom is the harm being done? Now, this is just the first layer of our thought experiment, and already we're bumping up against some uncomfortable questions. What truly constitutes a sin? Is it always about an infraction against a divine rule, regardless of context or impact? Or is morality inherently tied to our interactions with others? And if so, what happens when there are no others to interact with? Hold on to these questions because we're going to unpack them, challenging some long-held assumptions about divine law and human behavior. Before we move on to our next stage of the thought experiment, let's really think about that first scenario, the single, isolated man. What does the Bible, especially the Old Testament, really say about sins that seem to impact no one but the individual? We'll be looking at some very specific commands that might surprise you. Let's delve into some of those specific sins cited in this isolated context. Take the idea of cursing God. In the Old Testament, blasphemy is a serious offense, punishable by death. In Leviticus 24, verse 16, it states, "Anyone who blasphemes the name of the Lord is to be put to death. The entire assembly must stone them, whether foreigner or native born. When they blaspheme the name, they are to be put to death." This is clearly a severe crime within a community. But if Alex curses God on his alien planet in utter solitude, who's harmed? Is God genuinely offended in a way that requires cosmic punishment, even if no other human hears it or is influenced by it? And if we were to really take this idea to the letter of the law, who's going to stone Alex? Is he supposed to stone himself? Consider Job 2, verses 9 through 10, where Job's wife tells him, "Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die." But Job responds, "You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" Job refuses to curse God, maintaining his integrity even in suffering. His act of not cursing God is an internal, personal decision. But if he had cursed God with no audience, would it have the same moral weight as public blasphemy that could lead others astray? The Bible focuses on blasphemy within a community as it can corrupt others. Matthew 12:31 even speaks of blasphemy against the Spirit as an unforgivable sin. But again, the context is often public rejection and defiance. What about private defiance? Is it merely a thought crime? And if so, how does a loving God respond to a silent thought on a distant planet? Next, let's talk about the dietary laws, specifically the mention of shellfish. Leviticus 11, 9 through 12 is quite clear. "Of all the creatures living in the water, you may eat any that have fins and scales. But among the creatures that move about in the water, or among any living thing that is in the water, those that have no fins and scales are to be detestable to you. You are to regard them as detestable." This includes, well, shellfish. So if Alex finds an alien creature that perfectly resembles a lobster but has no fins or scales and he eats it, is he sinning? What if it's his only easily accessible source of protein on an otherwise barren part of the planet? Does God truly care about the dietary choices of an isolated man in such a context? The Mosaic Law in Leviticus 11 frames these dietary laws as making the Israelites holy and distinct from other nations. That's from Leviticus 11, 44 through 45. They are rules of separation and identity for a particular group. When that people group is reduced to one man on a distant world, does the very purpose of the law evaporate? We're going to explore how much of the Old Testament law is truly trans-contextual and how much is deeply embedded in the social and communal life of ancient Israel. It raises the question, are all sins universally applicable regardless of the circumstances? Or does their moral weight derive from their impact on a community or even on one's own well-being within a community? And what about the clothing laws? Deuteronomy 22, verse 11 states, "Do not wear clothes of wool and linen woven together," the classic two fabrics rule. If Alex painstakingly weaves himself a comfortable tunic from two different alien plant fibers, is he in violation of a divine command? Is this truly an immoral act worthy of judgment when he's just trying to survive and keep warm? Again, these laws in the Old Testament, like the Dietary laws, are often seen as part of the broader framework of Israel's distinctiveness and holiness before God, distinguishing them from surrounding pagan cultures. They served a social and religious function within a specific community. We're going to unpack this further. Are some of God's commands less about universal morality and more about specific cultural identity, even purity codes for a particular nation? And if so, does that diminish their sinfulness when removed from that context? Stick around, because the implications of this line of questioning are far-reaching. We're just scratching the surface of what it means for something to be truly sinful in the eyes of God. So far, we've focused on acts that seem to be violations of direct divine commands, regardless of interpersonal impact. But what about behaviors often deemed sins that are more typically associated with individual pleasure or internal states? Let's consider the idea of Alex lusting after pornography he might have salvaged from his ship. The New Testament, particularly Matthew 5, verse 28, states, "But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart." This is a profound shift in moral emphasis, moving from outward action to inward thought and desire. If lust is a sin of the heart, then Alex is certainly capable of committing it, even in isolation. But to whom is the harm? If there is no other to objectify, to exploit, or to cause jealousy, does the sin retain the same moral weight? Is it solely about God's perceived offense, or does it primarily relate to the potential for harm to others or the self? This brings us to a fundamental question. Is sin always a transgression against God alone? Or is its moral gravity often tied to its relational implications? We'll dive into what the Bible says about the nature of sin itself, exploring whether it's primarily a violation of abstract divine will or a breach of covenantal relationship. The answer might surprise you. Then there's the topic of masturbation, a practice often condemned in certain Christian circles, though not explicitly mentioned as a sin in the Bible. The prohibitions against sexual immorality in the Bible are overwhelmingly focused on sexual acts between individuals, especially those outside of sanctioned marriage or those involving exploitation, such as Leviticus 18, Romans 1, 26 through 27, or 1 Corinthians 6, 18 through 20. If Alex is the sole human on the planet and his actions are entirely solitary, does this fall under sexual immorality? If there's no one to defile, no one to objectify, no one to commit adultery against, is it still sinful? The argument for masturbation as sin often rests on broader principles like purity of thought, like in Philippians 4, verse 8, where it says, "Whatever is pure, think about such things," or the idea of the body as a temple of the Holy Spirit, as in 1 Corinthians 6, 19 through 20. But even then, if it's a solitary act without external impact, does it remain a sin in the traditional sense of an offense against God or others? Or is it more of a personal discipline? And if God's judgment is truly about the heart, what is the nature of that judgment in such an utterly unique, isolated context? Finally, let's imagine that Alex, in his profound loneliness, attempts to conjure spirits from his wreckage, perhaps from some old esoteric text that he salvaged. Deuteronomy 18:10 through 12 strictly forbids this. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritualist, or who consults the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. This is a clear, unequivocal prohibition. But why is it prohibited? Often it's because these practices were associated with pagan idolatry and led people away from Yahweh, as in 2 Kings 21 verse 6 or Isaiah 8 verse 19. They represent seeking power or guidance from sources other than God. In Alex's isolated scenario, he's not leading anyone astray. He's not engaging in pagan worship with others. So is the harm solely to God's divine ego? Or is there a deeper, inherent harm to the individual's spiritual well-being, even when he is in such isolation? This brings us back to our core tension. Is sin always an offense against God, irrespective of its relational or communal impact? Or do many of these biblical prohibitions primarily function within a communal context, designed to preserve the holiness and well-being of a people who are in covenant with God? We're going to pivot now to the second, even more provocative stage of our thought experiment. What happens when our solitary Alex gets a companion? And what are the implications for Christian morality? This is where things get truly interesting. Okay, so let's advance our thought experiment. Our lonely Alex has been living on his alien planet for years, utterly alone. Then, miraculously, another ship crashes. Another human being, let's call him Ben, survives the wreck. Like Alex, Ben's ship is hopelessly damaged. Communication equipment is gone, and there's no hope of rescue. So now there are two humans on this otherwise unpopulated planet. They are doomed to live out their lives together, or at least in each other's proximity, until they die. Now, with these two individuals sharing a world, let's consider the second key question. Is it even possible for these two men to do anything that is immoral? Assuming, of course, that they don't do anything to violate each other's rights, or autonomy, or safety. This is crucial. We're removing the obvious moral violations here. No murder, no theft from each other, no physical harm, no coercion. They agree on a fair division of resources. They respect each other's personal space. They live in harmony. But what about those actions that Christian theology often labels as sins, even when there's no direct harm to another person? Let's take the most immediate and perhaps most controversial example. What if Alex and Ben, being the only two humans on the planet, isolated from all societal norms and expectations, begin a sexual relationship? We're often told that homosexual acts are inherently sinful and abomination in the eyes of God. Leviticus 18:22 states, "Do not have sexual relations with a man as one does with a woman. That is detestable." And Romans 1:26 through 27 speaks of women exchanging natural relations for unnatural ones, and men committing shameless acts with other men as receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. So, according to these passages, if Alex and Ben begin a sexual relationship, are they destined to burn in hell? Even though they are the only two people on the planet, there's no one to offend in a societal sense, no one to corrupt, no lineage to break, no one to shame. If morality is truly about the well-being and flourishing of humans, and these two men are the only humans, and their relationship is consensual and mutually beneficial to them, how can this be considered immoral in a way that warrants eternal damnation. Doesn't the very purpose of sexual morality, often tied to procreation or the sanctity of traditional marriage, fall apart when the context is so profoundly altered? This isn't just about homosexuality, though it's a stark example. It highlights the perceived arbitrariness of certain divine commands when stripped of their relational and communal context. If the sin doesn't violate another person's rights or safety, then why the hell is it a sin? Is it merely a preference of the divine? We're going to explore what the Bible says about why certain sexual acts are prohibited, and you might be surprised to find that many of these prohibitions are deeply rooted in communal purity and distinctions from pagan practices. Does that context, or lack thereof, change the moral calculus? Next, consider the Sabbath. Exodus 20:8 through 10 commands, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns." If Alex and Ben decide to work on the Sabbath, perhaps building a shelter or cultivating more food, is it a sin? They're not exploiting anyone. They're not breaking a societal norm. They're not part of a covenant community that observes the Sabbath. The Sabbath was a sign of the covenant between God and Israel. That's from Exodus 31:16 through 17. It was a social institution designed to ensure rest and remind the people of God's creation and deliverance from slavery. If there is no society, no covenant people, and no one to exploit by overworking, does the concept of sinning by working on the Sabbath still apply? Or does it too become a petty rule in the vast emptiness of an alien world? We're going to unpack the purpose of the Sabbath laws, revealing how intimately they are tied to Israel's identity and social structure. Can a law designed for a specific community in a specific covenant truly apply universally in such isolated circumstances? The answer has profound implications for how we understand the very nature of God's commands. This is where the rubber meets the road for the idea of a truly universal morality versus one that is deeply contextual. Stick around because we're just getting to the core of this ethical puzzle. Our final scenario in this thought experiment. Alex and Ben are on their planet, coexisting peacefully, respecting each other's boundaries, but they decide to do something truly heretical, at least from a Christian perspective. They look up at the alien sky, they see a magnificent swirling gas giant, and decide to worship it as a deity. They build an altar, offer some alien fruit, and pray to this star god as the benevolent force that sustains their planet. According to Christian theology, this would almost certainly lead them to burn in hell. Exodus 20:3 through 5, the first two commandments, are clear. "You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God." Idolatry is consistently condemned throughout the Old Testament as the gravest sin, leading to severe consequences for Israel. That's from Deuteronomy 4:25 through 28 and Jeremiah 19:4 through 9. The New Testament also warns against it, as in 1 Corinthians 10 verse 14 and Galatians 5:19 through 21. But here's the crucial question again. If Alex and Ben are the only two humans on the planet and they are both perfectly content with their decision to worship the star, to whom is the harm being done? They aren't leading anyone else astray because there's no one else to lead. They aren't violating any covenant promises made to a larger community. They aren't causing societal breakdown or moral decay within a population. They are simply, in their utter isolation, choosing a form of spiritual expression that brings them comfort and meaning. Does the jealous God of the Bible genuinely feel slighted, offended, or harmed by the private, consensual worship choices of two utterly isolated individuals? Or is the prohibition against idolatry primarily concerned with its corrosive effects on a covenant people and their relationship with the true God in a context where false worship leads to social evils like child sacrifice or moral depravity, as seen in Leviticus 18 and the practices of surrounding nations? The biblical narrative frequently links idolatry not just to an offense against God's ego, but to the very real, tangible suffering that it brings upon a community: national defeat, famine, societal corruption. Jeremiah 7:5-7 links following other gods to neglecting justice and oppressing the vulnerable. When these communal consequences are utterly removed, does the sin of idolatry retain its eternal, hell-deserving gravity? The overall point of this entire thought experiment, from the solitary Alex to the companionship of Alex and Ben, is to highlight how incredibly petty, arbitrary, and disconnected Christian morality often feels when you strip it down to the very basics, the simple reality of humans interacting with other humans. And in the most extreme scenario, the reality of a human with no other humans to even interact with. If the moral system is truly meant to promote human flourishing, peace, and justice, then why do so many of its sins appear to be about rules and preferences that seem utterly irrelevant in the absence of a social context? If all the humans involved have no problem with what's happening, or in the most extreme scenario, if there are no other humans to even know what a person is doing, how is that possibly a moral system that others want to embrace, or that a loving God would enforce with eternal damnation? This entire exercise forces us to ask, is Christian morality, or any religious-based morality, truly about universal, inherent good and evil? Or is it fundamentally about covenant, community, and the establishment of a particular relationship with the deity designed for a specific people at a specific time? We've explored several biblical commands, from blasphemy to dietary laws, from sexual ethics to Sabbath observance, and finally, to the ultimate sin of idolatry. In each case, we've found that the biblical context often emphasizes the communal impact and the preservation of a distinct, holy people in covenant with God. When that communal context is removed, the sinfulness seems to diminish or even vanish from a purely human standpoint of harm. That isn't to say that God has no standards. It's to suggest that the nature of those standards and how they apply might be far more nuanced and context dependent than often taught. It challenges the idea of a flat, universal application of all biblical laws to all people at all times in all circumstances. Perhaps a significant portion of what we call sin in the Bible is primarily about violating a relationship, a covenant relationship with God and with fellow humans in a community, rather than an arbitrary list of divine preferences for behavior in a vacuum. If a loving God is truly just and concerned with our well-being, wouldn't his morality be rooted in principles that genuinely promote flourishing and minimize, especially in the absence of any other humans to harm? That's the core question that I leave you with today. Thank you for joining me here on Skepticus as we wrestled with these profound ethical dilemmas. If this discussion sparked new thoughts or challenged your perspective or just pissed you off, please let me know in the comments. Please hit the like button. Please subscribe. Please share the video. Please tell your grandmama. Please tell all you know and do all the things. Your engagement fuels these important conversations. I hope to see you next time on another video. Until that time, if I have screwed up anything in any way, Yahweh is free to come down or to speak in any way and set the record straight. Yahweh? Dude, you got to stop leaving me on hold. Okay, well, I guess Yahweh endorses this video. Thank you for being here. I hope to see you on future videos. And until I do, lo, I say unto you, stay skeptical.